It started with silence. Not the kind of silence you notice right away, but the kind that slowly sinks in. A silence where a familiar voice doesn't call, where a message never arrives, where days begin to blur, and that small, persistent thought in the back of your mind grows louder. Something's wrong. On June 20th, 2013, Randy Udall, a 61-year-old experienced hiker and respected environmentalist, set off alone into the Wind River Range of Wyoming. It wasn't unusual for Randy to head into the mountains. In fact, it was a rhythm in his life. Solitude in nature had always been his sanctuary, a place where he felt most at peace. But this time, something was different. Because this time, Randy didn't come back. His family didn't panic at first. He'd done solo treks before, always careful, always aware. Randy came from a family deeply rooted in the West, deeply rooted in service. His brother Mark Udall was a U.S. senator at the time. The Udalls were no strangers to adversity or the wilderness. They trusted that Randy knew what he was doing. But as the days passed, the absence became more than silence. It became a weight. He was due to return around June 26th. By June 28th, he still hadn't made contact. That's when the search began. What made this case so unnerving wasn't just the man who was missing. It was where he had gone missing. The Wind River Range is not forgiving terrain. With over 2.25 million acres of rugged peaks, high passes, and unpredictable weather, it's a place that doesn't yield answers easily. And Randy had left few clues behind. He hadn't signed any trailhead logs, no GPS tracker, no emergency beacon, no phone. That wasn't unusual for him. He preferred his hikes to be unencumbered, away from the digital world. But that choice, in this case, left searchers with almost nothing to go on. Still, they searched. Helicopters combed the skies. Ground teams braved high altitudes, unstable weather, and the brutal terrain of the Bridger Wilderness. Days turned into nights, nights into a week. Family, friends, strangers, they all held on to hope because Randy wasn't just another hiker. He was someone who understood these mountains, someone who respected them, and yet the mountains didn't give him back. Then, on July 13 days after he had left, a search team spotted something from the air, a motionless figure, lying in a remote area off-trail near a place called Europe Pass. They reached him by foot the next day. It was Randy. He was found lying peacefully beneath a tree, face up, hands folded on his chest. There were no signs of trauma, no signs of a struggle, just stillness. The coroner later concluded that Randy had died of natural causes, likely cardiac-related. Given his location, remote and over 10,000 feet in elevation, it's possible his heart simply gave out. Alone, miles from anyone. The official story is that he passed peacefully, in a place he loved. But the story doesn't end there. What troubled many wasn't just how Randy died, but how long he had remained undiscovered and how eerily silent his disappearance had been. He wasn't far from where search teams had passed before, and yet he had been overlooked. In life, Randy Udall was a man of principle, a passionate advocate for sustainable energy, known for his wit, his intellect, and his stubborn independence. He came from a long line of public servants, and though he often avoided the spotlight, he left a quiet legacy of thought leadership and action. In the Wind River Range, he wasn't just hiking, he was connecting with something larger than himself. But nature, for all its beauty, is indifferent. It doesn't care about pedigree, preparation, or purpose. It doesn't always grant second chances. And in Randy's case, it didn't leave behind answers. There are still lingering questions. Why did he veer off trail? Was he disoriented? Or had he chosen that spot intentionally, knowing perhaps that something was wrong? Why was he so difficult to find when his body was eventually discovered only a mile off the trail? Was there a chance, however slim, that he might have been found sooner? No one will ever truly know. And maybe that's what stays with people most. That someone so knowledgeable, so deeply connected to the land, could vanish into it so completely, and for so long. It's easy to draw comparisons between Randy's case and others. Some still mistakenly associate his disappearance with Grand Canyon cases, perhaps due to his prominence or the national coverage his case received. But the Wind River Range is its own unforgiving world. And for those who explore it, even with experience, the risks are real. Randy didn't die in fear. That much seems clear. He died doing what he loved in a place he held sacred. But his story is a quiet reminder, not of failure, but of fragility. Even the most seasoned among us can slip away without warning. Even the most well-trodden path can turn uncertain. And sometimes, despite every search, every effort, nature chooses to keep its silence. For Randy's family, there was heartbreak, but also peace. They knew him. They knew his love for those mountains. And they knew in the end, he found stillness there. Still, for the rest of us, it's a story that leaves something behind. A quiet question that lingers after the news has faded. If someone like Randy Udall can vanish, what else lies just beyond the trail? It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, a young couple, deeply in love, embarking on a daring journey down the Colorado River, surrounded by the jagged, echoing silence of the Grand Canyon. But they never came back. And what they left behind still haunts those canyon walls to this day. In November of 1928, Glenn and Bessie Hyde set out on a honeymoon unlike any other. Glenn, a tall, broad-shouldered Idahoan, was just 29 years old. He had a deep love for the outdoors, for the thrill of conquering rivers and rapids with nothing but wood, willpower, and muscle. Bessie, only 22, was far less experienced, but she was determined, artistic, and had already defied societal expectations by marrying Glenn just months earlier, after a whirlwind romance. Together, they crafted a plan that was part romance, part world record attempt. Glenn had built his own wooden sweep scow, an ungainly, flat-bottomed boat not typically used for rapids. He intended to navigate the dangerous Colorado River all the way through the Grand Canyon, a feat only a few had ever accomplished. If they succeeded, Bessie would be the first woman to ever make the full trip. They were going to do it alone. No guides, no safety crew, just the two of them and their boat. They launched in October from Green River, Utah. Glenn was confident. He had done stretches of the river before, and he believed the boat, while not ideal, would get them through. They wrote postcards from stops along the way. Photographs show them beaming, sun-warmed, and seemingly fearless. But even in these images, something lingers behind the smiles. Something unreadable. As they moved deeper into the canyon, the river grew more volatile. The rapids in this stretch are not for the faint of heart. Names like Hermit, Lava Falls, and Crystal evoke more than just scenic views. They represent raw power and chaos. Still, Glenn kept a tight log. Bessie kept a diary. Their last confirmed stop was at Hermit Camp, a popular spot for river runners and hikers. There, they met a photographer and river guide named Emery Kolb. He noted that Bessie looked uneasy, tired, withdrawn. Kolb later claimed she even asked him how to leave the canyon by mule. But Glenn, ever the optimist, was determined to push on. They left Hermit Camp on November 18th, planning to reach their final destination at Needles, California. They never made it. Weeks passed, no word, no signal, no return. In early December, a search party was launched. Not long after, a small plane spotted their boat adrift near River Mile 237, upright, supplies intact, camera and food still on board. But there was no sign of Glenn, no sign of Bessie, no torn clothing, no struggle, no footprints. It was as if they had simply stepped off the earth and into legend. The mystery gripped the nation. How could two people vanish without a trace, especially when their boat was fine? There was no evidence of a capsizing. The scow wasn't splintered, no gear was missing, their journals, clothes, and belongings remained undisturbed. It didn't add up. Over the years, theories piled up. Some believed they had capsized and drowned, their bodies carried downstream and never recovered. But experienced rivermen cast doubt on that. Glenn was cautious, methodical. And again, the boat was untouched. Others whispered darker possibilities. That maybe Glenn had met with foul play, or worse, Bessie had. Perhaps the marriage wasn't as joyful as it seemed. Maybe Bessie had grown weary of Glenn's relentless push for fame, and maybe she'd found a way out. The most eerie theory surfaced in the 1970s, when an elderly woman claimed to be Bessie Hyde herself. According to this account, she said Glenn had become abusive during the trip, and in a moment of fear, she had struck him and fled. The story was never verified. The woman later recanted. But the tale reopened old wounds and old questions. Then there was the strange discovery at the Kolb studio, decades after the couple vanished. In 1976, human remains were found buried near the building. For a moment, hopes rose that perhaps one of the Hydes had finally been found. But testing revealed the bones belonged to a man from a much later time period. The Grand Canyon, it seemed, wasn't ready to give up its secrets. To this day, the fate of Glenn and Bessie Hyde remains unsolved. Historians, outdoorsmen, and amateur sleuths still debate their final moments. Did a misstep on the rocks send one or both tumbling into the frigid waters? Did the couple argue and separate somewhere deep in the canyon's folds? Did Bessie strike off alone, hoping for a second life? The river, for all its beauty, has a way of keeping things hidden. Bodies vanish, echoes fade. Evidence is buried beneath layers of sediment and time. What makes this story so chilling is not just the loss itself, but the possibilities it leaves behind. Glenn and Bessie were young, idealistic, and daring. They chose adventure when the world expected routine. And in doing so, they left behind a haunting question that still echoes through those canyon walls. Did they meet their end together, as they had begun? Or did someone, fracture that final journey? It's a story that reminds us how quickly plans can shift, how even the strongest love can be tested by nature and time. The Hyde's disappearance isn't just a mystery. It's a mirror, reflecting our fascination with the unknown, and our quiet fear of what might lie just beyond the next bend in the river. If you're watching and you've ever been to the Grand Canyon or traveled somewhere remote with someone you love, you might understand the weight of what they were seeking, or what they may have lost. And maybe that's the real story here. Not just what happened in the end, but what they risked for the journey. One moment, Christopher Thompkins was walking beside his coworkers along a quiet rural fence line in Georgia. The next, he was gone, without a sound, without a trace. The only thing left behind was one boot, a few scattered tools, and a single scrap of fabric dangling from barbed wire. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, just an ordinary workday turned unexplainable. And more than 2 decades later, the questions still haunt the people who knew him and those who stumble across his story. How can a man vanish while surrounded by others with no one seeing a thing? Christopher's story begins like many others, quietly, without fanfare. He was 20 years old in January 2002, living in Ellerslie, Georgia. By all accounts, he was a good kid, respectful, reliable, responsible. He had a close-knit family, a strong work ethic, and a quiet personality that didn't draw much attention. He worked for a local surveyor, doing field work with a small crew that often spent their days walking long stretches of land in rural Georgia. The morning of January 25th, 2002 started like any other. Christopher arrived for work and joined 3 co-workers for a routine surveying job near Highway 85, close to a stretch of land bordered by private property and a thick patch of woods. The terrain was familiar. Fence lines, grassy fields, a mix of open space and dense brush. As they walked, the group stretched out along the line, maintaining some distance between each other while still moving in the same direction. Christopher was at the back of the line. One coworker was just a few steps ahead of him. The others were farther ahead, out of his direct line of sight, but still moving together. It wasn't unusual for the group to space out. It made the work easier, more efficient. But somewhere along that fence line, in that quiet patch of rural Georgia, something happened. At some point, one of the men glanced back. Christopher was gone. They called out, looked around, no answer. No movement in the brush. Just silence. It wasn't panic at first. Maybe he'd stepped off into the woods. Maybe he'd gone back to the truck. But minutes passed, then hours. And when they retraced their steps, they found something chilling. Near the fence, caught on the barbed wire, was a piece of Christopher's work pants. Just below it, one of his boots. A few feet away, some of the tools he'd been carrying. Everything positioned as if someone had stepped out of their clothes mid-step. There were no drag marks, no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away. Nothing to suggest where he'd gone. Law enforcement arrived quickly. A search began, involving helicopters, search dogs, volunteers. The woods were combed, the surrounding land scoured. But there was no sign of Christopher, not a footprint, not a thread of clothing, nothing. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed him whole. As the hours turned to days and the days into weeks, theories began to swirl. Some suggested he'd wandered off voluntarily, but those who knew him rejected that immediately. Christopher had left his wallet behind, his keys, his car. There was no evidence of a plan, no suggestion he wanted to disappear. Others wondered if he'd been the victim of foul play, perhaps targeted by someone he knew, or even one of the men he was working with. But those men all passed polygraph tests. There was no sign of deception and no motive. They'd been just yards away. How could something so catastrophic happen without any of them hearing a single sound? Christopher's mother, Anne, never accepted the idea that her son simply vanished on his own. She believed something terrible happened that day, something more than what meets the eye. And she fought to keep the case alive. She organized vigils, worked with private investigators, and kept pressing authorities to dig deeper. Years passed, and then came one of the strangest developments of all. A full year after Christopher disappeared, a second boot, his other boot, was discovered. It was found on private land, across the fence and deeper into the woods, far from where he was last seen. There was no way to know how it got there. It was worn, weathered, but unmistakably his. It was the only new clue the case would produce. After that, the trail went cold. For many, the most disturbing aspect of Christopher's disappearance isn't just that he vanished. It's how he vanished. How a young man could go from walking beside coworkers to evaporating into thin air with no one seeing or hearing anything. No signs of panic, no calls for help, just gone. Some have drawn parallels between Christopher's case and others like it, disappearances that happen suddenly, inexplicably in natural environments. Stories of missing hikers, lone travelers, even children vanishing just steps from their families. The kind of cases that leave behind more questions than answers. And perhaps that's why Christopher's story still lingers. It taps into a primal fear, the idea that the world isn't as solid as it seems, that a person can be there one moment and gone the next, leaving behind only fragments, a boot, a scrap of cloth, a mother's grief. In the years since, his family has never given up hope. They've continued to search, to speak out, to push for answers. And while no resolution has come, their fight ensures that Christopher's name is never forgotten. Sometimes, the quietest moments carry the deepest mysteries. And sometimes, the loudest question is the one left unanswered. How can someone simply disappear and no one see it happen? If you have any information about the disappearance of Christopher Thompkins, please contact local law enforcement. Even the smallest detail could help bring peace to a family still waiting for answers. Derek Lueking was seen walking out of a hotel near the entrance of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The next, he was gone. Without fanfare, without explanation. The only traces he left behind were found inside his abandoned car. Survival gear, his wallet, his phone, and a copy of a book titled The Ultimate Survival Guide. No note. No goodbye. Just a silent, sudden exit that has haunted his family for more than a decade. How does a man vanish just feet from one of the most visited national parks in the country without leaving a single footprint behind? Derek Lueking's story doesn't begin in the wilderness. It begins in the suburbs of Virginia. Born in 1986, Derek was 24 years old in March 2012, living at home in Louisville, Tennessee. By all accounts, he was a gentle soul, a caring son. Reliable, thoughtful, private. He had just earned his degree in psychology, and while he was still figuring out his path forward, he was known for his steadiness. But in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, something changed. According to his family, Derek began to isolate himself. He grew quieter, more introspective. He stopped texting friends as often. His routines shifted. He'd recently lost his job at a local hospital and seemed to be struggling, not just with the loss of work, but with something deeper. Still, he didn't alarm anyone. He hadn't said anything that would raise red flags. Until he vanished. On Friday, March 16, 2012, Derek told his parents he was heading to Cherokee, North Carolina, for a quick trip. Nothing unusual. It was a town just south of the Great Smoky Mountains. He packed a few things, hugged them goodbye, and drove off in his white Ford Escape. That would be the last time anyone saw him. The following day, security cameras captured footage of Derek checking into a hotel in Cherokee. He paid in cash, checked in alone, and early that next morning, March 17th, he walked out. No bag, no gear. Just Derek, dressed casually, stepping into the cold mountain air. And that was it. No one saw him again. When he didn't return home after the weekend, his parents grew concerned. Days passed. Then they called police. A search began, and on March 20th, Derek's car was found parked at Newfound Gap, a scenic overlook that straddles the Tennessee-North Carolina border, deep in the Great Smoky Mountains. Inside the vehicle, investigators found supplies. Not what you'd expect from someone lost in the woods, but instead, prepared. Deliberate. There was a sleeping bag, a tent, a knife, water, snacks, warm clothing, a rain poncho, maps, flashlights, and that unsettling addition, the ultimate survival guide. But no cell phone, no wallet, no keys, and no sign of Derek. The location was puzzling. Newfound Gap is a major trailhead, but Derek hadn't signed into any of the nearby trail logs. No one had seen him on the trails. Search dogs brought in to track his scent picked up nothing. Not a single trace. For nearly 2 weeks, rangers, volunteers, and helicopters scoured the area, covering over 70 miles of rugged terrain. They searched the Appalachian Trail, deep ravines, remote shelters, but nothing turned up. The mountains were silent. Theories began to form. Some believed Derek had ventured into the woods to test himself, perhaps to spend a few days alone, disconnected, in survival mode, a kind of self-imposed challenge. But if that were the case, why not take the gear he had so carefully packed? Why leave behind tools meant to keep him alive? Others feared something darker. That Derek had gone into the woods intending not to come back. A quiet goodbye, a final walk into the trees. But again, there were contradictions. He hadn't left a note. He hadn't shown signs of severe depression. He hadn't spoken of suicide. And those who knew him best insisted this wasn't like him. Then came the most puzzling detail of all. Just before he disappeared, Derek had posted something to his Facebook page. A single cryptic sentence. "Don't look for me." To this day, no one knows what he meant. Was it a genuine plea for solitude? A warning to loved ones not to worry? Or something more haunting? A sign that he knew he was leaving and didn't want to be found. The Great Smoky Mountains are vast, more than 500,000 acres of ridges, hollows, and dense woods, a place where cell service vanishes quickly and trails can disappear under fallen leaves, a place where if someone doesn't want to be found, they might not be. But those who study disappearances in national parks say Derek's case is unusual, even among the strangest ones. Most missing persons leave a trail, some clue, however faint. But Derek didn't just walk into the woods. He seemed to evaporate. No footprints, no gear disturbed, no animal activity. Nothing. For Derek's family, the silence has been unbearable. His father, Ram, became a tireless advocate, organizing searches, talking to park rangers, reaching out to wilderness experts. He believed his son was still out there somewhere, maybe injured, maybe lost, or maybe hiding. And that's the theory some people have clung to, that Derek didn't die in those mountains, but chose to leave his life behind. That the supplies left in the car weren't meant to be used, but to mislead. That "don't look for me" was a message, not a cry for help. Could he have slipped into the woods with a plan, crossed into a new town, taken on a new identity? But if so, why? He wasn't running from the law. He didn't owe anyone money. He had a family who loved him, a life waiting for him. Why disappear? Others think the answer may lie somewhere in the wilderness, hidden by time and weather. That Derek did go into the woods, but something happened. An accident, an animal encounter, hypothermia. That the silence isn't a mystery, but a tragedy. One the mountains are keeping. In the years since Derek vanished, his case has become one of those haunting stories that lingers on forums and in conversations about disappearances in national parks. Not because it's sensational, but because it feels possible, because it taps into something deeper. That a young man, alone and struggling, could walk into a national park and simply vanish, despite all the technology, all the resources, all the people watching. That someone can be there one day and gone the next, and that we may never know why. Today, Derek's case remains open. His family still hopes, still waits, and still wonders. If he's alive, they just want to know he's safe. If he's not, they want to bring him home. Because for those left behind, the hardest part isn't the loss, it's the not knowing. The long, quiet nights, the empty chair at the dinner table, the birthdays that pass with no phone call, the silence that follows a name whispered in prayer. Sometimes disappearances are more than just mysteries. They're stories without endings. And for Derek Lueking, the final chapter has yet to be written. If you have any information about the disappearance of Derek Lueking, please contact local authorities. Even the smallest tip could help give a family the answers they've been searching for.